He's an award-winning Toronto-based author whose latest book is called Who's the Man? Billy Van, shining a spotlight on a Canadian comedic icon. Greg Oliver joins us on Canada Now. Greg, good to speak with you again.
Thanks for having me on the show, Jeff.
Of course, anytime. Now, Billy Van is a massive deal in Hamilton, Ontario. He could sing, dance a little, act, make people laugh, of course. Is he one of the most overlooked Canadian icons, at least in terms of comedy?
I think in many ways he is, simply because he never had that one hit. You know, there wasn't like an Al Waxman we talk about. You know, he had King in Kensington.
Sure.
And he was definitely a peer of Billy's. But, I mean, everybody would associate that. But Billy did so many different things throughout his career, which started in the 1950s, singing, right up to doing voiceovers and cartoon work at the end of his life. And he died in 2003. So I think, and then his biggest hit wasn't really a hit in the traditional sense, but the hilarious House of Frightenstein, which was taped in Hamilton, has lived on forever. But that was 9 months of his career, where they filmed an incredible 130 episodes in 9 months, and it's been running ever since, and it's on Crave TV now.
Oh, is it? Because admittedly, I've only known him for the hilarious House of Frightenstein. As you mentioned, filmed in Hamilton. He played several different characters on the show. And Greg, there was nothing like that on television for me as a kid. Like, it was one of those shows that I didn't make an appointment to watch, but every time I would always find it on I think a Saturday morning or a Sunday morning. I can't remember. I think it was very early on a Saturday morning, like at 7 a.m. I'd always find it. And I'd love it. Like, it became like a staple for me. Like, because it was, I mean, it was funny, but it was like, there's nothing else like this that I'm watching on television right now.
It was like comedy horror aimed at kids, supposed to be educational. And it was a very, very weird hybrid, definitely ahead of its time. But yeah, Billy was a genius. I mean, he was, you know, whether he was the Oracle, whether he was in a gorilla suit, whether he was, you know, Count Frightenstein himself, whether he was, you know, Clyde Banawana Batty, like, he played all these different characters, and you didn't really realize as a kid it was the same guy again and again and again. And then later in life, maybe you're a teenager or a young adult, and you see it again, and you go, oh my God, that is the same guy every time.
Yeah. That's what happened to me. And I thought I was a genius when I discovered it. I was like, that looks like the same guy playing all those different characters. I can't believe, and I only know this because of you, Greg, I can't believe it was only filmed for 9 months. Like, in looking back, it was on forever. It was on all the time. I'd see it every week. I don't think I saw the same thing twice, at least very often. You mentioned how many episodes there were, but you know, in looking back, I would have thought that was a show that ran for like a good 5-6 years.
Well, the thing is, it was syndicated. So, you know, there never was a true distribution deal other than CHCH said we'd run it, and then they bought the studio time to film it there. Billy was just hired talent, though. And that's one of the beefs that comes up in the book, is that, you know, he was never paid for anything beyond just being on the show. And so as it lived on years and years after its initial taping in 1971, he never saw another dime. And so he kept getting more and more bitter about that through the years, to the point when he wrote his own memoir, which was never published, and which left out huge swaths of his not only his career but his own life. Doesn't mention his daughters or, you know, his 5 wives or things like that. But he didn't mention the producer by name, Riff Markowitz, because he couldn't stand him anymore. And yet, this is a guy. You mentioned shows that were on all the time. Party Game was another one that was syndicated across Canada, taped at CHCH, and Billy Van, Dinah Christie, and Jack Duffy all did this amazing charade show, and they would like hardcore tape 5 episodes every day, and then, you know, over the course of a month in the summer, they'd have a whole year's done. And again, you'd turn that on, you know, maybe just before dinner or wherever it was where you lived, and you got to see Billy Van at his improv best. Just being wacky. So I think he's ingrained in our culture and in our psyches in a way that a lot of artists aren't. But again, because he never had that breakout hit, he doesn't get the recognition he deserves.
Yeah, he was a performer on CBC's late-night program Nightcap in the U.S. He probably was best known for being the face of Colt 45 malt liquor, and he also appeared on Sonny and Cher. You mentioned his unpublished memoir. So are you saying you had an opportunity to sit down and read it?
Absolutely. Yeah, no, it's a big part of the book, but it's not anywhere near enough, right? I mean, this is Billy Van playing down his own contributions, saying he was only a second banana. He wasn't really a big deal. Well, he starred in CBC movies. He did all this travel around the world. Certainly the Colt 45 brought him the best money of his life and probably the biggest fame in the United States, though Sonny and Cher for a time was, a top 10 show in the United States. The guy had a massive career, but he also never tooted his own horn a lot. And then the last, couple of decades, he really just spent around Toronto, was happy to find work wherever it was, and a lot of that was educational shows. So he's, the craziest thing is the show that probably most people heard him on was called Eureka, which was a cartoon that was about physics that was distributed for about 30 years. And so all these high schools and everything everywhere got to learn about physics through the cartoons of Billy Van. That where he did the voice. So I mean, it's incredible legacy. But again, you wouldn't have known it was Billy Van.
Yeah. So how did you get? I'm fascinated with something that's unpublished that you got your hands on. Clearly, how did you get your hands on it? Was it through family?
Well, Stacey Case is my co-writer on this, and he's a longtime Billy Van Uber fan, and he ran a Hilarious House of Frightenstein fan fest a couple of years ago. Well, many years ago now. And all these different things. So he befriended the family, and Tracy Van Evera, who's Billy's second daughter, becomes key in the story, and she gave us a copy and certainly encouraged us and helped us along. So I was able to talk to her and Billy's first daughter that he basically had nothing to do with, and his first wife and his second wife, and then his third and fourth wife have both passed on, but I talked to one of their sons, and then his fifth wife, Susan, declined to participate. Though they were never officially married. They were common law married. So you never know what you're going to get as a biographer, but I was very happy to get so much support from the entertainment community. And even now, as I've been sending out complimentary books to people who I interviewed, guys like Vern Kennedy, who was, he would sing backup for Juliet, was one of the Romeos. So he called me up and said, I can't put the book down. I love it. It's reliving my life, even though it's not about him. But it's about, Canadian entertainment in the 50s and the 60s and into the 70s, where they were, the U.S. started to move in and use all our facilities, Canadian facilities, to tape shows like Bizarre or the Kenny Rogers Rolling on the River. It's a fascinating book in many ways, and I was so privileged to get to work on it.
Yeah, and it was released in December. Canadian actor Brent Butt of CTV's Corner Gas, who was interviewed for the book as well, said that he can't wait to read it at the time of which he said that. It's great that you've gotten this kind of response. I mean, it's a testament to your work and the effort that you put in, but it's a testament to Billy Van as well.
It is, and so many people are saying exactly that. It's like, man, I love this guy, and now I know so much more about him. Because... Yeah. Canada has always been terrible about celebrating its own stars, and it really wasn't until the 80s when you had guys like your John Candys and your Mike Myers and the Jim Carreys where that really started to happen, and that was partly just because of the growth of the entertainment industry in general. But back in the 70s, it wasn't that big a deal that somebody went down to the U.S. to work. And yet the Sonny and Cher show, about 75% of the people working on it were Canadian. It's crazy.
Wow. Well, as you mentioned, he passed away in 2003. He was born in 1934. A very, very private person. We didn't know too much about Billy Van up until your book. Was that the incentive for you to write this book? Obviously you're passionate about getting the word out there about somebody that should be celebrated, that is Canadian. But given that he was so private, is that part of the reason why you knew you had to write this book and put it out?
I'm not sure exactly that. It was more a fascination. Right? Like whether I saw him on Party Game or whether on Bizarre, especially. Early in this process, as your readers may or may not, or your listeners may or may not know, I write about professional wrestling as well. And so there was an old wrestler named Rotten Reggie Love who was on Bizarre a lot. And so I got to talk to John Biner, and I asked him about Billy Van. And that's sort of, that was more than a decade ago. But it starts the gears going, right? And you start thinking, I want to learn more. I want to learn more. And once we got to the point where Stacey had been gifted the unpublished memoir, it was a great big starting point. And everything else from there helps really fill it out. Whether it was a sitcom he filmed with Sheila McCarthy that never really aired more than once on CBC, or whether it was Frightenstein or Party Game that ran forever.
You have so many interviews done for this book. Tell us about some of those. Like you mentioned some of those names already, in Sheila McCarthy and Dinah Christie, but the list goes on. John Binder, the list goes on and on about those that were interviewed for this book.
Yeah, sometimes you have to pinch yourself, right? It's like, oh man, I'm talking to Murray Langston, the unknown comic, and how many times did I watch him on the Gong Show? So those kind of moments. But then my favorite story though was, well, there's probably two. I mean, I got to have a nice boozy dinner with Lou Bagoy, going through all the different stories with Billy and taping bits and bites. But it was probably just hanging out with Diana Christie for 2 or 3 hours up at her farmhouse with my wife and I, and just hearing her stories. And it really solidified that this is a very, very rich story, and Billy Van's a very complex man. And the fact that she didn't know a lot about him made it more intriguing. So certainly the family opening up, his niece, his nephew, his 2 daughters, and his ex-wives, it really made it monstrously important to get the word out there and really tell who Billy Van was as the man. And it's warts and all. I mean, this is a man who definitely drank too much, who had nothing to do with his first daughter. So there's definitely some flaws, a lot of flaws in Billy Van's life, for all the joy and great stuff he brought to the screen.
What was it like uncovering private details of Billy Van that not even his family knew?
It can be a little tricky, but I've I go back to the pro wrestling analogy. It's like, man, I've written about pro wrestling for so long, and it's such a closed business where they want to keep all the secrets out, and you learn secrets and you can't necessarily report them. That I guess in that way I was prepared. When I found the Billy Van stuff, I wasn't shocked by any of it. It's just you have to break it to the family in a different way. It's like, oh, did you know this or did you know that? And they didn't. And that's just part of the job as a journalist. But in this case, there's so much more give and take, because you do want the family's cooperation, but they basically gave us carte blanche and said, write what needs to be written. And that's, again, like I said, warts and all, because there's painful letters in there where, like, his first daughter has letters that Billy sent her, I'll come and visit you in Florida, and then he never does.
Well, you mentioned Stacey Case out of Hamilton, a Billy Van Facebook page that Stacey Case runs. Is that still up and going? It's got, like, what, 1,200 fan followers?
Absolutely, yeah. That was tied in. Stacey Case also ran the Billy Van Museum in Hamilton for a little while, but pandemic and different issues forced it to close. But we knew the book was coming all along, so that was partly a fundraiser to start raising a little bit of money to eventually get this book out there, which we did. We got stymied a little bit trying to find a traditional publisher, but in this day and age, that doesn't really hurt you. I've done enough layouts of real books and had 15 other of my books published that I know enough by now to get it out there. So it's been fun. We run billyvan.ca, which takes you to the sales page. And, yeah, we have the Facebook page. But, there's lots of other places to talk about Billy Van, right? There's a Colt 45 Facebook page, too. Like, I had no idea, right? Until you start looking, you don't know what's out there. So for people who just love Colt 45 or love Hilarious House of Frightenstein, there's a whole Facebook section, too. So it's but that's the challenge here, is getting the word out there, and I appreciate you helping a little bit, Jeff.
Of course. Check out billyvan.ca and oliverbooks.ca as well. Who's the Man? Billy Van, written by Greg Oliver. Greg, it's great to catch up with you. Congratulations on this book once again. I'm so glad you wrote it. Thank you so much for joining us, man. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for spreading the word. Have a good one.
Of course. Take care. There is a Greg Oliver. Again, oliverbooks.ca, billyvan.ca. The book is called Who's the Man? Billy Van.